Welcome to Unit 3 of the Florida Real Estate Sales Associate 63 hours pre-licensing course. Unit 3 is going to talk about real estate license law and the commission rules. Every state has a regulatory body who's in charge of uh, overseeing the real estate activities in that state, real estate practices in that state. You also should remember there is a mechanism in place to provide the administrative support for that entity, for that body to operate in an effective manner. In this topic, in this unit, we will be talking about the licensing of individuals, licensing of companies, entities, brokerages, and real estate schools who are involved in the real estate practices. We will talk about FREC, which is the Florida Real Estate Commission, the DBPR, the Department of Business and Professional Regulation, and the DRE, which is the Department of Real Estate. Talking about registration of the real estate schools and the entities, licensing requirements, active and inactive licenses, null and void licenses, what would put you in a situation where your license becomes void and ineffective to do businesses and their corresponding fee schedules. So the learning objectives of this unit, by the time you're done with this unit, you'll be able to describe the scope and the function of the Florida Real Estate Commission and the DBPR and the Department of Real Estate. You'll be able to describe the composition of the Florida Real Estate Commission, their members, what it takes to become a member of the Florida Real Estate Commission. You'll be able to describe the general powers, duties, and responsibilities of the Florida Real Estate Commission. You'll be able to distinguish between inactive and active licenses and describe the regulations regarding the involuntarily inactive licenses. You'll be able to distinguish between the multiple and the group licensing. Welcome to Unit 3, Real Estate License Law and the Commission Rules. Now, every state has a regulatory body who is in charge and responsible for overseeing the real estate practices and activities in that state. In addition to that body, there's always a mechanism in place that provides administrative support to that body so it can operate in an effective manner. Licensing of individuals, licensing of firms, real estate school, and pretty much anybody who is involved in the real estate business, real estate practice is the primary day-to-day effort in the license for the work. This unit describes Florida Real Estate Commission, FREC, the DBPR, which is the Department of Business and Professional Regulations, and DRE, which is the Department of Real Estate. The relationships between these entities, how they regulate the real estate practices in the state of Florida, license requirements, active license, inactive license, null and void licenses, and their fee schedules. By the time you are done with this chapter, you should be able to describe the scope of the Florida Real Estate Commission, the Department of Business Professional Regulations, and the Department of Real Estate. You should be able to describe the composition and the qualifications to become a member of the Florida Real Estate Commission, the powers and the duties of the Florida Real Estate Commission, distinguish between the active license, inactive license, voluntarily inactive license, involuntarily inactive license, and different statuses. You should also be able to distinguish between the multiple license and the group licenses. So let's start with the DBPR. The DBPR stands for the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. That is the body, and its prime purpose is to regulate businesses, and professions in the state of Florida. It falls under the executive branch of the governor. The chief administrator, who is the secretary of the DBPR, is appointed by the governor and is confirmed by the Florida Senate. Its prime responsibility is to regulate the licensees, and regulate the business and professions in the state of Florida. So let's start with the DBPR. The DBPR stands for the Department of Business and Professional Regulations. It's the body that is in charge for regulating businesses and professions in the state of Florida. Now remember this, it falls under the executive branch of the governor. It has the authority, the DBPR has the authority to investigate consumer complaints, issue subpoenas when conducting investigations, issue cease and desist orders for unlicensed individuals, and also issue citations to licensees. The secretary, the chief administrator of the DBPR, is the secretary who is appointed by the governor and is confirmed by the Florida Senate. Now, the DBPR has divisions, different divisions. One of them being the Division of Professions. The Division of Professions is responsible for regulating the education courses and the license exams. Second one is the Division of Service Operations. That's where talk about customer contact center, a central intake unit. And the third division of the DBPR is the Division of Florida Condominiums, Timeshares, and Mobile Homes. And the fourth division is the Department of Real Estate. Now, the Department of Real Estate has administrative and ministerial duties. The administrative duties includes routine duties and clerical functions on behalf of the FREC. The ministerial duties involve record keeping, bookkeeping. The Florida statute mandates that the Department of Real Estate offices and the principal officer of the commission are located in Orlando. The Department of Real Estate, the director of the DRE, it's different from the secretary of the director of the Department of Real Estate, the director of the DRE has to be appointed by the DBPR secretary and subject to approval by the majority vote of the FREC. So now let's talk about the Florida Real Estate Commission, FREC. What is the purpose of Florida Real Estate Commission? FREC is the regulatory body that's charged by the Florida legislature to protect the public, the consumers, by regulating the real estate practice, real estate brokers and brokerage firms, broker associates, sales associates, and real estate schools and instructors collectively. Another responsibility is to ensure that there is a minimum competency level for all licensees, regardless of which license. There has to be a minimum competency level that is established by the Florida Real Estate Commission. It also is responsible to foster the education and the continuing education of the licensees. So what is the composition and qualification of the members of the FREC? Important to remember, the FREC comprises of 7 members, out of which 5 of the members must be professionally licensed, and 2 of them should be consumers, which are not licensed by the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. Remember, 5 of them have to be licensed and 2 of them have to be consumer members. Now, out of those 5 members, 4 of them must be licensed as a real estate broker for the minimum 5 years preceding the date of the appointment. Now, one of the members could be an active real estate broker or an active sales licensee who have an active license for the past 2 years preceding the date of appointment. That's a total of 7 members. Now, they're appointed by the governor and, of course, subject to the confirmation by the Florida Senate. And they cannot be for more than 4 years staggered terms, which is 2 consecutive terms. They are accountable to the governor for the proper operation and the performance of the Florida Real Estate Commission. The members are exempted from the civil liability, and one of the members must be at least 60 years of age or older. The compensation that they receive is $50 per day for each day on official business, plus any other expenses if there are incurred. Let's talk about the commission general powers and duties. So the commission powers are kind of divided into 3 segments. One of them being the executive power, second being quasi-legislative, and the third one being quasi-judicial. So let's talk about the executive power here. It's power to regulate and enforce the license law, fostering of education of applicants and licenses, adopting a seal, which is the prima facie, and establishing the fees. The quasi-legislative is the power to enact the administrative rules and the bylaws. Of the responsibilities is to create and adapt the rules and the bylaws. The other one is to regulate the profession practices. Now let's talk about the quasi-judicial. Now, this is the power of the commission to discipline the licensees. The ability, the power to grant or deny license applications, suspend or revoke licenses, and impose administrative fines. And make a determination of those violations, whether they are genuine or not. The FREC must inform the divisions of timeshares, condominiums, and mobile homes when a disciplinary action is taken against a licensee. The Department of Real Estate provides services only to administer the license law. They don't have the power to impose any kind of imprisonment or any other penalty other than administrative fines. Now, license renewal periods. The initial effective date of the license that is issued by the DBPR is a less of 18 months or a maximum of 24 months. Real estate licenses are renewed on a biannual basis. They expire on March 31st or September 30th of every year. The initial license that is given by the DBPR is, like I said, no less than 18 months and no more than 24 months. So you can fall within those renewal cycles. Now, as far as the license renewal is concerned, the DBPR is going to notify you within 90 days before the expiration of your license. You must renew before the expiration date, or your license will revert to an involuntarily inactive status. As we move forward into this unit, we'll talk about the different statuses of the licenses. But for now, you should remember that you must renew your license before the expiration period in order for your license to get reverted to an involuntarily inactive status. Now, in the event you fail to renew your license within the expiration period, by the end of the expiration period, you have 24 months to apply and get your license reinstated. Now, once you pass that 24-month period, then your license automatically becomes null and void, and you have to start from scratch. Basically, you have to reset the clock. So I tell all my agents, all my students that it's very important to remember that your license expiration date, your license must be renewed before the expiration date. And in the event you're unable to do that, you must make sure that you're able to do it within the first 24 months of your expiration. Now, you must complete all your post-licensing and continuing education requirements before you apply for your renewals. Now, the DBPR and the FREC offers exemptions, certain exemptions to members of the U.S. Armed Forces when it comes to the renewal exemptions. Now, one of the requirements is the license has to be in good standing. The member of the U.S. Armed Forces must be on an active duty or and for 2 years after a discharge. So that's the criteria. If the military duty is out of state, then the licensed spouse of that person is also going to be eligible for that exemption. Now, the exemption does not apply if the licensee engages in any real estate brokerage activities in a private sector during that period. So you have to be on active duty or 2 years after your discharge to be eligible for that exemption. Now let's talk about the license statuses, okay? Your active license versus an inactive license. So remember this, in order for you to practice real estate in the state of Florida, you need to have an active real estate license. And sales associate must be employed by an employing broker. We talked about this in the past, that a sales associate cannot independently perform real estate activities, need to be under the supervision of an employing broker. So you need to have an active license in order for you to practice real estate in the state of Florida. So now let's talk about voluntarily inactive license. What is a voluntarily inactive status? It's very simple. Classic example, a real estate licensee who chooses not to engage in the real estate business for any personal reasons, professional reasons, but they still want to keep that license active. So those are the individuals who will apply for a voluntarily inactive status so that their license is active and they can get back in the business whenever they choose to. Now, remember, if it's a sales associate license, you still need to be working under an employing broker. Now, even though you are on a voluntarily or involuntarily inactive license, you are still obligated to comply with all the post-licensing and continuing education requirements as required by the state of Florida. Now, what is an involuntarily inactive license? So any licensee who fails to renew that license within the end of the expiration period is considered as an involuntarily inactive license. Now, failure to renew that license would put your license in an involuntarily inactive status. If you fail to renew that license within the 2 years after the expiration, your license will become null and void. You have to start from scratch. You have to reset the clock, comply with all the pre-licensing education, and basically start from scratch. Now, the FREC may reinstate your license in certain situations of hardship where if you're able to demonstrate that you went through some kind of a physical or financial hardship, then the FREC may choose to reinstate your license and give you a time to complete your education requirement and renew your license. Now, remember this, it's very important. The FREC does not have the legislative authority to grant you that reinstatement beyond the 6-month period. So remember this, if you need to apply for reinstatement based on any physical or economic hardship, it has to be done in writing, and the FREC has to make a decision whether that's a genuine reason or not. and then they cannot extend this beyond the 6-month period. So apart from these qualifications, there are some other classifications of the real estate license. Let's talk about null and void. We kind of talked about it in the past, but when a license is void, it no longer exists. It's done. So what are the circumstances where the license becomes null and void? A license becomes involuntarily inactive for more than 2 years, becomes null and void without any further action required by the DBPR or the FREC. It automatically becomes null and void. Another circumstances could be a revocation of a license following a disciplinary proceeding against any license is permanent. So if there is any disciplinary proceeding against that license, it would become, the revocation would take place and the license would become null and void. Another instance is a licensee fails to comply with the post-licensing education requirement. I've been talking about it in the past. I put a lot of stress on it. It's very important. The 45-hour post-licensing requirement is very important. It must be completed before the end of the first renewal. And that's why I personally recommend that everybody should get it out of the way and complete your 45 hours within the first few months of getting your real estate license, so you don't forget about it and get into any kind of an issue. Finally, a person who chooses not to engage in the real estate activity and voluntarily cancels your license, then yes, that would also fall into the null and void category. If it's, as long as there is no pending investigation or any proceedings against you, you can choose to get your license null and void by simply canceling it and surrendering your license. Another classification would be cease to be enforced. Interesting category. When can a license cease to be enforced? So certain situations, circumstances, so let's say a broker who's changing their business address. While they're doing that, the license ceases to be enforced. A real estate school changing business address, a sales associate changing employers, very common for real estate agents to change brokerages depending upon their situation. That also puts that license into cease to be enforced category. Or an instructor changing employers for a real estate school or a licensed education provider. All of these categories would put your license into cease to be enforced. Now remember, it's your responsibility as a licensee. If you go through any of those scenarios, you have to notify the DBPR within 10 calendar days of any changes that are occurring. Okay. 10 calendar days is the requirement. Let's talk about current mailing address. So your current mailing address is your residential address where you receive mails from U.S. Postal Services. Now, post box office, or PO box, is an acceptable mailing address format. Okay. Now, in case there is any change in your mailing address, you have to notify the DBPR within 10 calendar days. Important date to remember, 10 calendar days, because DBPR sends you all official communications on the address on the file and the email address on the file. So any of those things changes, it's your responsibility to notify the DBPR within 10 calendar days. Now, if you fail to do that, there is a $1,000 citation to timely notify the DBPR. So please keep that in mind. 10 calendar days or $1,000 penalty. Now let's talk about requirements for non-residents. So first we'll talk about licensees who are residents of Florida and they have changed residency. The requirement is that you have to notify within 60 days of change of your residency. 60 days of change of your residency if you choose to leave Florida and become a resident, become a non-resident. Now, regardless of your residency, you must comply with all your post-licensing and continuing education requirements as required by the Florida Real Estate Commission. Now, in the event you fail to timely notify of the change of residency, then you would be subject to a $600 citation. So this was for individuals, licensees who were residents of Florida and who have changed their residency and become non-residents. So now let's talk about the non-residents who wish to apply for a Florida real estate license. Now, the Florida Real Estate allows you to obtain a real estate license and practice real estate in the state of Florida, even though if you are a non-resident. Just like a regular resident application, a U.S. citizenship is not required, but a U.S. Social Security number is required. They do not have to be residents of Florida. On your applications, all non-residents will have to affirm that they are not a resident of the state of Florida, and they have to comply with all the rules and regulations as stated in the chapter Florida Statute 475 and all the FREC rules. Now, as a licensee, what is your eligibility to receive commission? Remember this. If you want to practice real estate in the state of Florida and you want to be entitled for commission, you need to have an active real estate license. You cannot be inactive if you want to receive commissions, if you want to receive compensation for your services. Now, remember, as a real estate license, you cannot share your commission with any unlicensed person, be it a friend, family, co-worker. If you wish to share your real estate commission with any person, make sure that that person is licensed. Change of employer. Even though a sales associate is in transition and changing employers, they have certain responsibilities to their former employers. Now, each brokerage operates differently. They have their own policy manual, which kind of dictates how the listings are operated, how the overall business is operated within that brokerage. But by default, the listings belong to the broker, okay? Any kind of removal of records from the previous brokers is considered as a theft. It's not right. Now, fiduciary duties. You have to remember that all the clients and the listings and the contracts belong to the broker. So even if you're changing companies, changing brokerages, you may not divert buyers and sellers from your previous broker to the new broker. Now that's very subjective because typically, agents work as independent contractors, but you have to understand that that buyer or the seller belongs to the broker. And if they choose to still stay under that brokerage, work with that brokerage, and they may choose to work with any other agent who is under that umbrella, and you may not be able to, you should not divert the buyers and sellers from your previous broker to your new broker. Difference between a multiple license and a group license. So who qualifies to apply for a multiple license? A multiple license is issued to a broker who chooses to work as a broker of record for more than one entities. They are the ones who have to apply for a multiple license. So for each business, a broker chooses to work with or act as a broker of record for that entity must apply individually for each entity as a separate real estate license. Now, because remember this, now sales associate have to work under the supervision of an employing broker. So they do not qualify. They are not eligible to apply for a multiple license. So multiple license can only be issued to a broker who chooses to work for more than one entity. The group license. What's a group license? Group license is sometimes issued to sales associates and the broker associates who work typically under a registered as an owner developer. An owner developer is a person, entity who owns multiple properties in the names of various entities. So the owner developer sends a list of all the entities with the same ownership to the DVPR, and the sales associate or the broker associate, remember, they only have one license. They have one employer, which is the developer, but they can work in any of the developer sites as long as the ownership of those entities are under the same broker as same owner developer when it comes to applying for a group license. So this concludes our Unit 3 for the real estate license and commissions law. I see that there is a lot of information that was provided and a lot of timelines for you to remember. So let's knock out these 10 questions which are in the quiz, and I will see you in Unit 4.